This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
What's up, y'all? I want to welcome you back to the HuntStand Podcast, Season 2, and this is your host, Will Cooper. The HuntStand Podcast is your weekly source for insightful conversations with veteran hunters, dedicated outdoor enthusiasts, and top industry personnel. I'm going to have guests on here who are true experts in their field, delving into the captivating world of our industry and the great outdoors. With each episode, you, the listener, are going to be able to receive invaluable knowledge, tips, and guidance on how to enhance your skills in the wild and even in life. So tune in weekly to be entertained, informed, and driven to reach new heights. So what does that mean? That means you need to make sure that you do whatever you got to do to make sure that you get notifications weekly whenever I put a new HuntStand podcast up, because you're not going to want to miss out on the guests and people that I bring on here to bring all this to you. The HuntStand Podcast is brought to you by Yamaha and its full line of class-defining, adventure-seeking motorcycles, ATVs, and side-by-side vehicles. The HuntStand Podcast is also brought to you by Springfield Armory and their Model 2020 Waypoint rifles. HuntStand Podcast, Season 2, buckle up, it's going to be a good ride. Let's go. What's going on, y'all? It's your host, Will, coming back for a new episode, HuntStand Podcast, Season 2, Episode 2. We've got a new wildest hunting story, near-death, crazy story for you. And who we got on today is Mr. Jim Zumbo. Now, if you're any younger than me, younger than about 30 years old, you may not have never heard of Jim. Now, Jim has been on the outdoor channels. He has had a television show, writer, outdoor enthusiast, and he's just about done anything and everything you can think of in the outdoor space, from being wildlife biologist, writing books. And Jim also has 2 degrees in forestry and wildlife management and worked as a forester and wildlife biologist for 15 years. Now, I'm not going to get too in-depth on his story because I want him to tell his story. That's why I get these guys on here, to tell y'all who they are. And so what we're going to be getting into is Jim had a pretty wild experience with a moose, some ice, and a beaver pond. So, I'm not going to tell y'all too much more on that, but nonetheless, I'm going to quit rambling. But we just want to thank y'all again for tuning in to HuntStand Podcast. Season 2 is underway. We got Jim on here, and we're going to get this story to find out what happened. You ready to get the HuntStand Podcast rolling?
You betcha.
All right. Well, Jim, first and foremost, just want to thank you for your time today, and welcome to the HuntStand Podcast.
Well, thanks, Will. My pleasure to be on.
Absolutely, man. Grew up watching you doing some stuff on the outdoor industry, hunting channels and everything, so it's pretty cool to get to sit down with you and podcast with you. And so what we're going to be doing for this series is what I'm going to be calling it is the Wildest Hunting Stories series. And so we're going to get into that in a little bit, but before I do, what I like to do to get each of my podcasts started is I like for the guests to kind of give our listeners what I call that 30-foot tree stand view, if you will. So, just kind of give us the background story on you a little bit, and how you got into the hunting industry and how you got to where you are now in life.
Alrighty. Well, I started out with my grandfathers, my dad and uncles, and we ran eagle hounds and chased cottontail rabbits a long time ago. And I'm sure a lot of folks have started with their family as mentors. But I always wanted to be a forest ranger or game warden, so I went to a little forestry school in northern New York up by the Canadian border, and I got a 2-year degree in forestry, and then I went on to Utah State and got my 4-year bachelor's degree. And while I was in school, I was writing for the newspaper at the university, a little outdoor column. And one day I went to a party with a bunch of foresters and professors, and one of the professors walked up to me and he said, "Zumbo," he said, "you write for that little candy-ass college publication. He says, why don't you try to be a real writer and write a piece for Outdoor Life? Of course, I didn't know. I knew Outdoor Life was in New York City, one of the biggest outdoor magazines out there. And he says, I'll bet you a case of Lucky Lager beer that you can't do that. So I took him up on it. Long story short, I wrote a story, and by golly, Outdoor Life accepted it. So that was the very beginning of the start of my writing. But
really,
yeah.
Well,
at that point,
what? Sorry to interrupt. What was the story? Do you remember? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Hell, I'll remember that the rest of my days. There's a lake that straddles the Utah-Idaho border called Bear Lake. Mm-hmm. It's a turquoise blue. I guess it's a prehistoric lake, natural lake. It's about 20 miles long, and it's got a little fish in it called the Bonneville Cisco. It's about 7 inches long, and it spawns in January when it's 20 below zero outside. But all the people that live in the area, and some come from afar to catch these things, the limit's 50, and you catch them in a net because they spawn close to shore. Mm-hmm. And it's like a big gala event. It's a circus. People are out there. The Lions Club is selling hot dogs and coffee and hot chocolate, and people are burning tires. There's hundreds of people. So I thought that might be a cool piece for Outdoor Life. So that's what I did. That was my first story.
Sweet.
Then I went on to freelance. Well, I had gotten my forestry degree, and I worked as a forest ranger and a wildlife biologist for 15 years. And during that time, I freelanced for a variety of magazines, Outdoor Life, Field and Stream, Sports Afield, whatever. And I got a phone call one time from New York from one of the editors of Outdoor Life asking me if I wanted to be a full-time Western editor. And I'd worked for the government for 15 years. I had, building a pension and had all the nice the medical stuff. And, I said, do I have to do it full-time? He said, yeah. He says, you're going to have the Western region and 40 writers working for you. I said, whoa. But anyway, I took him up on it. I left my government job and walked away whistling. And so I was first wore the cap of Outdoor Life as Western editor. And then they made me editor at large, which basically means editor on the loose. And so I traveled all around, and I wrote hunting and fishing stories around the country. And then in 1990, they made me hunting editor. I had my own column. And actually, Jim Carmichael, who was a shooting editor, and I wore the shoes of Jack O'Connor. And I did that for 30 years. So right now I'm basically semi-retired. I do a little bit of writing. I write the back page for Peterson's Hunting and some other stuff. So that in a nutshell is my career. But I've done obviously hunting for a living. You have to hunt a lot. And my wife can tell you that when she did the taxes, that there were years when I was home, maybe 60 days.
Wow.
Yeah. But I wanted to hunt all 50 states for deer, which I did. And I hunted elk in every state I could, except California and Nevada, where tags are impossible to get pretty much. And hunted Alaska 30, 40 times, Canada the same. And most of my hunts were more Western wilderness horseback stuff rather than hunting from a tree stand, although I did hunt from tree stand. In fact, I was raised in whitetail country back east. But so most of my stuff was in the mountains.
How long did it take you to, talking about that, killing a whitetail out of 50 states, how long did it take you to do that?
I was in the shower one morning and I got to thinking, working for Outdoor Life, you got to have a column every month. That's 12 columns a year. Plus you got to have 6 features, and you got to have a lot of information. You can't be writing about cottontails in your backyard all the time. So you have to travel, and because our readership obviously is national based. And so at that point, I think I had like 25 states done. And I said, I think I'm going to try to hunt all 50. Which ultimately I did. And from that point on, it took me about 10 years. Mm-hmm. I'd leave here in my pickup truck and drive to Maine, for example, and try to hunt 2 or 3 states, like maybe Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont on that trip. And then another year I'd hunt maybe Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, whatever, try to group those states. But the goal was to hunt at least 3 days in every state, not necessarily to kill a deer, because it was kind of too late for that. I really, when I finished, I was probably 65 years old. And in a lot of the states was either chance or choice. Like I was in Kansas looking for a big buck. I passed 10 or 11 bucks, smaller ones, and I didn't get a buck. So I didn't get one in Kansas. In some places I never saw a deer because I might have showed up at the last 3 days of the season and had been hammered by everybody else. Some states I went with friends and outfitters. A lot of states I just went by myself. It's just so I can mix it all up. So basically that was it.
Okay.
So,
okay. Well, man, that's quite the accomplishment. I know, there's quite a few people that can't say that they've done that. So kudos to you on getting that done.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, man, what I want to talk about is the meat and potatoes of this podcast today, and that's talking about that craziest or that wildest story or experience that you've had when on a hunting trip. And, you've been to a lot of different places, a lot of different states, hunted out of the country some. And so let's talk what that wildest story. Let's talk about that first one that comes to mind, whether it was a near-death experience or what have you. Let's hear that. What's that first story that comes to mind?
Well, we talked about this before, and I got to thinking, a lot of crazy stuff has happened in my life, but the nearest death experience I've had, now I've hunted leopards in Africa, and I've hunted all the caribou subspecies, been on a lot of bush planes and flights that I shouldn't have taken, been on horses I shouldn't have ridden, been in boats. I've been in boats I shouldn't have been on. I've had a lot of interesting experiences, but what comes to mind is a moose hunt that I had right here in my home state of Wyoming, about 25 years ago. And I was looking for, everybody wants a big bull moose, but at any rate, I showed up at this ranch, and the rancher did not like moose because they broke his fences and they ate all his hay. And so he told me to shoot every moose on the property, which of course was illegal. I just won. But he made the mistake of telling me that he saw the biggest moose of his life about 3 days before I arrived. Now, this guy was a fourth generation Wyoming hike. He was an old dude that had seen a lot of moose. And I thought, holy smokes. So I held out for that bull. I had maybe 5 days to hunt. I passed up several smaller bulls, and cows were legal as well. Mm-hmm. So there I am on the last day of the season, the last hour of the last day, and I see a cow elk standing in the willows about 150 yards away. So I'm thinking, if I shoot this cow, I'm going to be getting her out of here in the dark, and it's 25 below zero. It was cold. So I kind of thought, well, but then I thought, if I don't shoot this cow, I'm going to go home without a moose. So I shot the cow, and I realized I had to hurry up and get the field dressing job done quickly, because I'd come back the next day and bone her out, dress her, and skin her and everything. So
yeah.
When I went to the cow, there was a beaver pond between us. And I thought that's the closest distance between 2 points. So I crossed the pond, thought the ice was safe. I got about 3/4 of the way over, and my foot went through all the way to my waist, my right leg. Jeez. And I'm wearing Wranglers of all things. Cotton is the worst thing you can possibly use in the cold. But being a dumb cowboy, I have wool clothes. I have the good stuff, but I was just wearing my Wranglers, so my leg went all the way down into the water, and I knew I was in trouble. So I got to the moose, and I just dressed her as fast as any moose had ever. I just taken stuff out and throw it out, and while I was doing so, I could feel that my leg was already starting to freeze. My Wranglers were freezing my skin, 25 below. So,
jeez,
I managed to get her dressed, and now it's dark, and the moon is out, and their stars are out. And you could see, of course, just the starlight, and I didn't know where my truck was. It was somewhere in that swamp because I wasn't paying attention for whatever reason. And I've got a pretty decent sense of direction, but back in those days, there was no GPS. Mm-hmm. There was no sort of device to help you find something. You couldn't put a peg in some place. So now I'm panicked, and I'm crawling. I'm dragging my leg, and I've got a stick as a cane, headed who knows where. And suddenly I saw a reflection, which was the windshield of my truck reflecting off the moonlight. And I thought, holy smokes, there's my truck. Can I get there? It was probably a good 1/4 mile away. So I started dragging myself toward the truck, and I'm getting colder and colder. My teeth are chattering. I know I'm in the advanced stages of hypothermia. because I'd been there before, but this was serious. And somehow I got to the truck, and I was so weak and so cold, and my leg was so stiff, I couldn't move it. It was stiff as a board. I tried to reach the door handle of my truck, and I couldn't reach it. And I just fell back down in the snow. And I'm thinking, I'm going to die here unless I get to that handle of that truck. So with one big effort, I grabbed the handle. I opened the door. Now, I had a 5-speed on the floor stick, old-fashioned truck with a clutch on the floor. A lot of people don't even know what a clutch is anymore.
No, they don't. No, they don't.
So now I've got to push the clutch down and grab the stick and put it in neutral. And then somehow the key was already in the ignition. I just left it there. But I tried that several times and I kept falling down. So somehow I got this last gigantic effort, and I was able to grab a hold of the steering wheel with one hand, and I grabbed a hold with the other hand, and now I had to push the clutch down with my left hand, which I did. Then I was able to reach over and put the stick in neutral, but I couldn't turn the key. My hand was so cold. I mean, it was ice cold. I couldn't turn it. I just laid there. And I thought, if I don't turn that key, this is the end of it, because nobody was around. This ranch was very rural. The ranch house was a long ways away. Finally, I managed to turn that key, and the truck started, thank God. And I just laid there and the heater was already on. It was in the on position, so I didn't have to turn any dials. So I just laid there by the steering wheel until that heat came on, and was able to warm up, and somehow my leg was still frozen. I had to pull myself up into the cab of the truck and got that all done. It took a long time, and managed to drive out of there. My camper was parked back at basically by the ranch headquarters, and I was basically spending the night in that thing, but I knew that I had to get somewhere and get that leg thawed out. So I rented a motel room in a small town close by, and I jumped in a bathtub. Didn't jump, I staggered into the bathtub and just got in there with my Levi's and all, and just waited until everything got in warm water, waited till it melted, and I got out of there. And next morning I woke up and I was certainly good. I was alive, because that was a close call. So I went back in there with a cart and packed all the moose out, boned it, but what was interesting was when I was in school in New York, in the northern Adirondacks, which is also a very rural place, we foresters lived in a dormitory way out in the middle of nowhere. And one of my buddies was out hunting deer, and he didn't come. It was also about 20 below zero. Snow was about 3 foot deep. Mm-hmm. And he was probably the best outdoors of our crew. I was like 19 years old, and he didn't come back at dark, and we were worried about him. And about 2 hours later, we called the state police and search and rescue, and they started looking for him, and suddenly we heard a thump on the door, and here was Dave. Same exact thing happened to him. He was basically unconscious when we opened the door. Holy cow. He was almost frozen to death. So we took him to the hospital, and they didn't think he would live, but his leg also went into the Beaver pond, and it was frozen. I was thinking about him all the time when I was gutting that moose. Mm-hmm. This is just like old Dave Donovan back east. This is what's going to happen. But so that was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me.
Now, did you suffer any frostbite from it at all?
No, I didn't. But actually, on that, when my friend Dave had that incident in the Adirondacks, he had killed a buck. And he put a candy wrapper up on a tree, and it snowed that night after this whole thing happened. And me and 2 other guys went in to get the buck. He killed a really nice buck. And it took a while, but we finally found that tree. We saw the candy wrapper, and the buck was covered with snow. It's just one antler was sticking out. And we dug him out and dragged him back. And I lost the glove when I was dragging him back. And that's when I suffered frostbite, 3 fingers. That's the only time I suffered frostbite during. And I'm a Yankee, I was born and raised in upstate New York, and I've lived only in the North Country. And, to me, snow is a must every winter. So, but that's the only time I had any frostbite. So, yeah.
Okay. So I want to back it up a little bit to right after the shot. You shoot this moose, and you're walking over to recover it, and you talk about how your foot just goes straight down all the way through, water up to almost your hip from this beaver pond. What was kind of that first initial thought that went through your mind?
First thought was to get the heck out of there as fast as I could. Luckily, my foot hit the bottom. It was about 2.5, 3 foot deep. So I wasn't at the point where I was going to go all the way under.
Mm-hmm.
So and again, I was, it's a long time ago, and I was a lot younger, and I was now a lot stronger. So I was able to just lift myself out, and I gave a big heave, and I just got my knee on the edge of the ice and pushed myself toward the shore. And I grabbed a willow branch that was close to shore and used that to kind of give me some leverage. So I pulled myself on the shore.
Okay. Did you ever think, I know, I don't know if you've ever seen, I think it's the movie Revenant, where Leonardo DiCaprio's in and he kills that big bear and he crawls inside for warmth. And I mean, obviously this movie's after, this is way before that movie, but did you ever have that thought in your mind that as you're field dressing this moose to maybe stick that leg in there for warmth, or did you ever think about that, or how to get a fire going or anything?
No, I didn't. I basically was just interested in getting back to the truck as soon as I could. I remember my hands were so cold, but when I was dressing the moose, I'd stick my hand in the warm blood, and that would actually warm my hand up, because I was working without gloves, because it was a whole lot easier to use a knife without gloves, but I had the gloves nearby. But I didn't think about sticking my leg in there. That's a good point, Will.
it kind of got me thinking. I was like, I wonder if that ever went through his mind, for warmth. But then, so you get this moose field dressed, right? And how did you?
It wasn't a very good job. I got the entrails out behind the diaphragm. I left the heart and the lungs in there because it's so cold. I mean, she was going to freeze immediately, and I wasn't worried about loss of any meat. So, but I got the important stuff out. I got all the stomach and all the intestines and all that stuff out.
So. I feel like a lot of guys and gals, if they found themselves in this situation, I feel like anybody for that matter, like you said, you kind of have that panic that goes through your mind, thinking about where's the truck? How do I get back? This is before the GPS and, the app days. I mean, how did you find it in yourself to remain calm and not freak out or panic that, you could have found yourself going the complete opposite direction? I mean, how did you find that courage, if you will?
Well, I guess it was a matter of just pure survival.
Mm-hmm.
Again, thinking back about what happened to Dave in northern New York, that consistently came to mind. But I was pretty confident I could find the truck. I knew kind of the direction it was in, and I swear I dressed that cow in 7 minutes. I mean, I just ripping and slashing and tearing, and I just wanted out of there, but I never really panicked because I realized if I did panic, then I'd really be in trouble. So I didn't, but my leg was starting to freeze kind of gradually, and I didn't realize it. But when I was done with the moose, then I realized I was going to have to drag myself. And I found I actually, from that pond where the beavers were, I found one of those sticks that were nice and stout. And I used that to drag myself along. But I was scared. I really was. I was scared. I just had no idea. Building a fire at that point, I don't think my hands were capable of. I had a backpack, of course, and I had all the stuff. My backpack, I carry like 8 kinds of fire starters and all sorts of stuff. But I just wanted out of there because I didn't think that. There was really no wood. It was willows, and willows are about as thick as a cigar.
Yeah.
So there really wasn't anything to get a fire going, but. So it was just a matter of mind over matter, I guess, and getting out of there.
Oh, for sure. I mean, how far were you from the truck, would you say?
Probably a quarter mile to a half a mile.
Okay. So,
but luckily it was parked in an area. It was on a 2-track at the end of a 2-track, and it was kind of an open spot in the willows. The willows were really low, like 2 foot low or so, 2 foot high. So if it was in the dense willows, I might have never seen it, and I might not be here to tell the story. So,
but luckily you had that moon reflect off that windshield.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah.
Now, Do you have any kids? Did you have any kids at that point, or?
Yeah, all my kids were born. I got 3 girls and a boy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all you could think about was them and getting back to your wife and kids.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. You betcha. And they would all probably call me a dummy because all of them hunt, including my daughters. They've all got their deer and elk, and stuff. But they say, Dad, how could you have done such a stupid thing?
It happens to the best of us. It
happens.
happens.
I had no idea that beaver pond was what had happened was when beavers come out in the wintertime under the ice, they basically go back and forth. And I think maybe I was on top of their travel lane where the bubbles, might have made the ice thinner or something. Because I used to trap beaver, and I've noticed that around the lodge itself, the ice might be thinner. But I was just thinking of getting to that moose and getting her dressed and getting out of there. But I absolutely was not thinking about doing any skinning or quartering or anything. I just wanted her guts out so I could come back the next morning.
And you got back to the truck, luckily, got warmed up, and got yourself at a hotel.
And it was cold enough. There were no grizzlies around, and that was before the wolves were introduced. So I wasn't worried about much. There might have been some coyotes work on it, but I wasn't too worried about that either.
So after this happens to you, obviously you got plenty more places you got to hunt, plenty more places you got to go, got to see. What would you say was probably the biggest thing you learned from this near-death experience?
Never trust the ice. Use a system where you can get back to your vehicle with your device, like HuntStand.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Yeah. As far as taking a shot close to the dark, that's common. Mm-hmm. Elk hunting has been my forte. I've hunted elk pretty much everywhere. Most of my elk have been taken the last 10 minutes of light because that's when they're active. They'll be in the timber chewing their cud all day long. Yeah. And when it's getting dark, they want to get out to the meadows and feed. You kill an elk or anything, big animal, 10 minutes before dark. I'm not talking before shooting. I mean dark. Yeah. You're going to have a night job with a flashlight, but that didn't occur to me really. What occurred to me was finding the truck. So I would still take a shot close to shooting light, but I do it a lot smarter, and I'd have that device so I could find my way out of there.
Absolutely.
And I wouldn't be wearing cotton Wranglers when I was hunting. Cold weather.
You quit wearing Wranglers after that hunt for a while?
Well, I really haven't. I used to be on a pro team of a big camo company, and they kept saying, Zumbo, for God's sakes, quit being a cowboy. Wear our camo trousers instead of those Wranglers. So, no, clothing is way important. I like the layered effect for cold weather. Cold weather hunting, there's so much good stuff out there now, the garments that are made and just incredible stuff. So I certainly want to be prepared in that way.
Absolutely.
My jacket for years was just a Levi jacket with like a cotton collar on it. I wore that no matter 25, 30 below, but it was stupid. But that was just me, just me.
Well, I mean, heck, that's all you had back then, wasn't it?
That's true. Yeah. The camo companies, Realtree and Mossy Oak didn't come around until about 1986. Mm-hmm. So, and I'd done a lot of hunting prior to that. But so basically back in those days, we're wearing red and black checkered wool clothes. And so, yeah, you're right. It took a while for the camo companies to come on and make some really good stuff rather than just designer stuff, but stuff that was practical and really worked in the cold and the wind and the snow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk to the hunter out there. We've talked about kind of what you learned from this. We've talked about it, and let's say, somebody's listening to this, and what you could say next could potentially help them out. So let's say one of our listeners finds themselves in a situation like this. They've got an animal down, or maybe they're tromping through the woods. It's right at dark, and they step through that beaver pond, and they're covered in the water from foot to hip, and it's -20, -15 degrees out there. And so what would you have to say to that listener right now, like, to help them get through that situation and survive?
Well, the big factor would be if you could get a fire going and try to dry your leg out as much as you can, or legs. And again, that necessitates the availability of wood to build a fire with. I was not in a place where I could find some, but that would be an important thing. And also, always make sure you've got an escape route, or you can backtrack exactly to where you want to go, back to a road or your vehicle or whatever. Hunting solo for a moose or an elk, or even a mule deer in the backcountry, is not smart. A lot of people do it. I've done it. It's always best to have a companion,
right?
And so that companion will know where you are. But as far as the actual moment when you know you're in trouble, if you can get a fire going, if you got a long ways to go, in your backpack, you should carry stuff that you can. And let me say this, there's companies that'll sell you a little piece of metal with something you scrape and make a spark, survival situations. That's stupid. I mean, if you're looking to save your life, you want to flame right away.
Yeah.
They've got those 10-inch things. You press the button and a little torch comes out. What do you call the thing? Whatever.
A good little lighter.
Hey, cheat on it. Carry those. Carry a Bic lighter. Carry something that's going to work, because your hands could be so cold. I had a good buddy. He taught Arctic survival in the Air Force up in Alaska. And he said that your hands can be so cold that you cannot undo a button. You cannot pull a Velcro strap. You cannot do a zipper. So you've got to make sure that you can literally manipulate something with your almost frozen fingers. So, for example, remember the old 35 millimeter film containers? You can get 7 cotton balls in that thing, smear them with Vaseline, and stick those in there. Those things will burn for 10 minutes.
Wow.
A candle will burn for a long time. I have fat wood in my thing. White birch burns like gasoline. There's all sorts of things to get that fire going. That's very important. And, if you're in a remote area, let's say you're in Alaska or the tundra or Africa or wherever, you can always have a satellite phone. And you could, I'd call my wife from Botswana, and just like she's next door. You can rent those things I used to, I don't know what you can do now, but $60 a month, or $60 a week. But have some sort of a backup plan, because you just never know.
Absolutely. Now, did your wife or family or friends know where you were at that moment? So if that way, if something did happen, they could come find your truck?
Generally speaking, she knew I was in Western Wyoming somewhere.
Didn't know trailhead per se, huh?
No, I was actually on a ranch. I found this rancher because he actually, in the Wyoming Game and Fish deal, he had his phone number. He wanted hunters to help shoot some of those moose. So I knew where I was going to be. I don't remember if I told her or not. Now I do, because I'm a whole lot older. In fact, she doesn't like me to hunt alone anymore anyway, which I don't, because, being my age, you got back issues and foot issues and knee issues and brain issues. So I think it's a good idea to be with a guy, or at least have somebody know where you are. That's so very important. Especially if, like, you might be camped in a wilderness somewhere and there's 3 or 4 of you, got a wall tent up, and one guy says, I'm going to go down over to Blue Hollow, and make sure you tell your buddies where you are, because you don't come back, then at least they know where they can go look for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely good advice. Now, since this, have you ever found yourself in any kind of other situation that could have been similar, that you were more prepared for, or anything that happened to you that you're like, okay, I've been here before, we know how to handle this?
Well, kind of. Yeah, I was... several hunts come to mind. One time I was up in the Yukon hunting moose and grizzlies, and our guide he had gone to look on another mountain, and he didn't get back to us. I was with my cameraman. I was shooting a TV show, and we had moved, because I'd seen a moose on a slope bedded in the willows, and I can only see one side of his palm, and wanted to get closer to see what he was. So we moved, and he couldn't find us. So we basically spent the night there. It was pretty cold. But we had backpacks, we had our horses, and we had stuff in the saddlebags. So, but I spent the night out other times, usually on purpose. I used to bivouac by myself when I was in my 30s and 40s, and wherever night fell, that's where I'd lay down. I'd have a little tent that I didn't put up unless I had to. I had the sleeping bag and I had food, and I always camped near water, and so. Again, it's a matter of being prepared and hunting smart, but sometimes we don't hunt smart because hunting is so unpredictable. You might park I've done this a million times. You park your truck somewhere and you say, I'm going to take a look over that hill. It's 100 yards away. So you leave your backpack and you don't even take your gun. And well, most of the time you do take your gun just in case. So you walk over 100 away and say, God darn, what's over there? I see some tracks over there with your binocs. So you walk, before you know it, you're 3 miles away from the truck. You've got no backpack, you've got your gun. It's stupid. So it's always a good idea to plan. If you're going to leave the truck or your four-wheeler or your side-by-side or your Razor, whatever you're in, just assume that you're going to be walking farther than where you initially wanted to go.
Absolutely. Well, Jim, I know we're starting to run slim on time here, and I love getting to talk about this story with you. And so before we part ways, do you just have any final advice out there for the listeners? Just, other than we've talked about being prepared, having that contingency plan, that backup plan, any last minute advice for those listeners out there?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is to know the country you're going to hunt in beforehand. If you can do any scouting, I think it's really important to understand what you might be getting into in terms of terrain and the type of vegetation and timber you're going to be hunting in, so you can at least get some kind of a clue what you're going to be dealing with. Again, have that backpack loaded with everything you're going to need, whatever comes to mind. And there's all sorts of information out there on what to use in your backpack. And don't exceed your physical expectations. I live here just outside Yellowstone Park near Cody, Wyoming, and I live literally a quarter mile from the wilderness boundary.
Yeah,
the Shoshone National Forest. And people come out here from, I don't want to call them flatlanders, but they're from lower elevations.
You can call us that. I'm from Texas. It's okay.
They really don't know what they're up against. So you just, we have grizzly bears here, lots of grizzly bears. We're right in prime country. You need to be concerned about that and make sure you can defend yourself with either a gun that you practice with or with bear spray. But as far as your physical expectations, I know 3 guys who died while packing out an elk. 3 different guys on 3 different occasions.
Seriously.
I know them. I didn't just know them by name. I knew who they were, and I went to 2 of their funerals.
Holy crap.
So it's really important when you come out here. Maybe you think you want to try to drag that or carry that 90-pound elk quarter on your back over 2 more mountains. So if you do so, do it wisely, take it slow, don't exert yourself, because at the upper elevations there's thinner oxygen, so that's one thing you've got against you. That's probably my biggest advice. I see a lot of folks come here from out of town and they just don't have any idea. And hunting here, it's all mountains, whether it's here in Wyoming or Montana or Idaho or Utah, it's basically mountain hunting. So you just have to respect that. When I was in forestry school, I had a wildlife professor, and he wrote in big words on a blackboard, Mother Nature is a bitch. That's so true. I mean, that might be true, whether it comes predator animals killing each other or whatever, or people out there, Mother Nature can get you. She can be beautiful, with the sunsets and the sundowns and the aurora borealis and all that stuff, but she can kill you if you're not careful.
That's why she's queen.
So, that's right.
That's why she's queen. And what you're talking about, like not underestimating, basically the entire West. I feel like that's a big thing. I've been hunting with people before that, you got to prepare. You've got to work out.
Yeah.
You've got to be in shape for those mountains. And a lot of people take that for granted, and they show up on that mountain and they get 100 yards off the truck and they realize that they're unprepared. So yeah, that's
true.
That's super.
Let me add a footnote to that. And I always wrote in my stories, if you're not walking 5 miles a day when you're hunting elk, you're not hunting elk right.
Yeah.
So be prepared. Go see a doctor, get a checkup, and go to a gym and work out. Well, one time I got a letter from a good friend of mine, a Texan. He was probably 80 years old. He said, and I knew him quite well. He said, Jim, he says, you keep saying you got to walk 5 miles a day to hunt elk. He said, I can't walk 5 miles a day anymore. There's a lot of us out there who are in our 60s, 70s, 80s. We got physical limitations. We can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's right. So my suggestion is to hunt smarter. Just try to hunt with a companion. Maybe hunt on a ridge and work your way downhill to a road in the bottom, so you're not climbing all the time, and have somebody down there to pick you up. Or just in Colorado, we call it the pumpkin patch because there's so many orange hunters, on public land. There's orange everywhere. Well, some people are annoyed by that, but you can use those people to your advantage. You might only have to walk 100 yards off a road, sit in a good spot, stay there all day, bring your lunch with you. I've killed 2 elk doing that.
Jeez.
But just sitting and letting all the other hunters. So when you're older, and I'm only speaking to the older guys out there, then just be careful. So, yeah.
Good things to think about. Well, Jim, I really appreciate your time this morning, talking hunting, talking stories, and, get you on the podcast again another day, but appreciate it.
Thank you, Will. It's been fun talking to you.
Absolutely. All right, y'all, there you go. Another end to another episode. We just want to thank Jim for his time on the HuntStand Podcast today to bring his story to y'all. Now, something like that, falling through ice on a frigid day like that, you can find yourself in a very sticky, scary situation like Jim did on that day. And so my hope for all of y'all out there is that when you listen to this, that you will be able to take a little nugget of information from this to be a little bit more prepared when you're out in the woods, and just be aware of your surroundings. And if you find yourself in a situation like this, hopefully you'll be able to think about this podcast and know what Jim did and what he did to get himself warm. So that way, if you ever find yourself in those same shoes, you can handle it. But just remember, preparedness and remaining calm whenever you find yourself in a situation like that. But again, y'all, we just want to thank you for tuning in to the HuntStand Podcast, and we'll see you on the next one.